I'm Wendy, 32 years old, and I never thought I'd see the day when my entire family would turn against me in a room full of hundreds. Standing in the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton during our family's annual charity gala, I watched my sister Victoria raise her champagne glass with that familiar smirk. Well, at least those of us with real jobs can afford to donate properly. She announced, her voice cutting through the elegant crowd like a knife. The room erupted in laughter, and I stood there clutching my own glass, watching my parents, my brother, even my cousins join in the mockery. 6 months later, that same sister would be sobbing on my doorstep at 2 a.m, begging for the help only my fake job could provide. Before we dive into how my family's cruelty became their downfall, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Are you someone who's been underestimated by your own family? Hit that like button if you've ever been told your dreams weren't good enough, and don't forget to subscribe because this story of sweet vindication is about to take some incredible turns. Let's start with the night that changed everything, when the Wellington family dynasty showed me exactly who they really were. The Wellington name carried weight in Boston's elite circles, and my family never let anyone forget it. My father, Richard, had built his reputation as one of the city's most ruthless investment bankers, managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions. He'd wake up at 4:30 every morning pressing his custom Italian suits and checking the Asian markets before most people had their first cup of coffee. My mother, Catherine, complimented him perfectly as the ultimate socialite, serving on 12 different charity boards and hosting dinner parties where million-dollar deals were discussed between the soup and salad course. She had this way of making everyone feel simultaneously welcome and inferior, a skill she'd perfected over 30 years of climbing Boston's social ladder. Then there was Victoria, my older sister by 3 years, who'd followed the family blueprint to perfection. Harvard Law, just like grandfather, wanted, then straight into corporate law at Whitman and Associates, where she specialized in merger acquisitions. She lived in a Back Bay brownstone that cost more than most people make in a lifetime, and drove a Mercedes that she replaced every 2 years just because she could. My brother James had taken the medical route, becoming a neurosurgeon at Massachusetts General. At 28, he was the youngest department head in the hospital's history, and never let anyone forget it. He collected luxury watches the way other people collected stamps, each one worth more than a car. And then there was me. I'd started on the approved path, graduating from Yale Law and joining Preston and Partners as a junior associate. For 2 years, I lived the life they expected, working 100-hour weeks, eating takeout at my desk at midnight, and slowly dying inside. The breaking point came when I realized I was helping corporations avoid environmental regulations that would have protected communities where kids were getting sick. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror anymore. So I quit. I walked away from a 6-figure salary and the Wellington seal of approval to become a freelance digital marketing consultant and social media strategist. To say my family was disappointed would be like saying the Titanic had a minor incident with some ice. They were horrified. "You're going to do what? Play on the internet for a living," my father had bellowed when I told him. Posting pictures and writing tweets, Catherine had actually clutched her pearls, real honest-to-God pearls, and declared that no Wellington had ever been in trade before. Victoria laughed so hard she spilled her wine on her designer dress, which honestly felt like karma at the time. The annual Wellington Charity Gala was their crown jewel event, held every December at the Ritz-Carlton. 500 of Boston's wealthiest families would gather in their finest clothes to write checks for whatever cause Catherine had selected that year. This year, it was literacy programs for underprivileged youth, which was ironic considering how badly my family needed to read the room about their own behavior. I'd almost skipped it, but grandfather Walter had called personally to ask me to attend. At 91, he was the only family member who'd ever shown me genuine kindness, and I couldn't say no to him. I'd arrived in my best dress, a simple black cocktail number I'd bought 2 years ago. Nothing compared to Victoria's custom Versace gown, or Catherine's vintage Chanel. I'd even scraped together $500 to donate, which had meant eating ramen for 2 weeks and picking up extra client work. I was proud of that donation. It represented real sacrifice, real effort. But as I stood there listening to the auction results with people casually bidding $30,000 on weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard, I felt that familiar shrinking feeling I got around my family. That's when Victoria struck. She'd had 3 martinis by then, just enough to loosen her tongue, but not enough to slur her words. She waited until there was a lull in conversation, until she had maximum attention. "Oh, Wendy," she called out across the room. "What was your donation this year? I hope you managed more than last year's $100. Although I suppose that's what happens when you abandon a real career to play influencer." The room went quiet for a moment. Then the laughter started. Not kind laughter, but the cruel tinkling sound of people who enjoyed watching someone being put in their place. "500, I said quietly, lifting my chin. "I donated $500. 500. Victoria repeated loud enough for everyone to hear. "How generous, that's almost what I spend on my monthly facial treatments. Everyone, let's give my sister a round of applause for her contribution." The mockery in her voice was thick as honey and twice as sticky. The applause that followed was slow and sarcastic, each clap feeling like a slap. My mother glided over her smile, sharp as broken glass. "Really, Wendy? If you needed help, you should have just asked. It's embarrassing for all of us when you can barely participate in our family's philanthropic efforts." She said it loud enough for the Henderson family to hear, and I saw Mrs. Henderson whisper something to her daughter while looking at me with pity. "Maybe if you'd stayed at Preston and Partners." Richard added, appearing at Catherine's side like they'd choreographed this. "You'd have something worthwhile to contribute. But no, you had to go chase this internet nonsense. Do you know what the Blackwoods donated? 50,000. Their daughter Jennifer is a partner at her firm now. Same age as you." Even James joined in, abandoning his usual strategy of staying above the fray. "I donated 25,000. He said casually, checking his Rolex like he had somewhere more important to be. "But then again, saving lives pays better than... What is it you do again?" "Help people pick Instagram filters." My friend Samantha, one of the few people there who actually cared about me, tried to interject. "Actually, Wendy's work is incredibly sophisticated. She's helped several startups build their entire digital presence and..." But Victoria cut her off with a laugh. "Oh, please, Samantha. We all know you're just being kind. Real businesses hire real firms, not someone working from their kitchen table." The pile-on continued for another excruciating 10 minutes. Cousins I'd grown up with shared knowing looks and whispered comments. Aunts and uncles who'd bounced me on their knees as a baby now avoided eye contact. Even the catering staff seemed to be smirking as they refilled glasses around me. I stood there, spine straight, smile fixed, dying inside, but refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. But the worst was yet to come. During the slideshow presentation about the charity's work, I noticed something odd. The Wellington family section showed photos of all their professional achievements, their contributions to society. Richard at the stock exchange, Catherine cutting ribbons at hospital wings, Victoria in her law office, James in surgical scrubs. But where my photo should have been, there was just empty space. They'd literally erased me from the family narrative. After the presentation, I overheard Victoria talking to a group of potential investors for some project she was working on. "Oh, that's just my sister Wendy. She's the black sheep of the family. Couldn't cut it in law, so now she plays around online. We don't really talk about her much. It's a sensitive subject for my parents, you understand." They had such high hopes. The final straw came when I went to the bathroom to compose myself and overheard Catherine talking to her friend, Margaret Whitfield. "It's just so disappointing," Catherine was saying. "We gave her every opportunity, the best education money could buy, and she threw it all away to become some kind of internet personality. I tell people she's taking a sabbatical to find herself. It's less embarrassing than the truth." I left the gala early that night, making excuses about a client emergency. As I walked to my beat-up Honda Civic in a parking lot full of Bentleys and Teslas, I told myself their opinions didn't matter. I told myself I was happy with my choices, proud of my work. But their laughter followed me home, echoing in my small apartment, keeping me awake until dawn. 2 weeks after the gala, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, Brew Awakening, trying to forget the whole humiliating experience when my cousin Bradley slid into the seat across from me. Bradley was the son of my father's brother, and while he'd always been pleasant enough, we weren't particularly close. The worried expression on his face made me put down my laptop immediately. "Wendy, we need to talk," he said, glancing around nervously like he was about to sell state secrets. "What happened at the gala? It wasn't spontaneous. They planned it." He pulled out his phone and showed me a WhatsApp group chat titled Real Wellingtons. My stomach dropped as I realized I wasn't included in this family group that seemed to have everyone else, including distant cousins I barely knew. The messages were brutal. Going back months, I could see Victoria orchestrating the entire humiliation. "We need to make it clear at the gala that Wendy's lifestyle choices don't represent the Wellington standard," one message read. Another from my mother said, "If we all make our position clear, maybe she'll finally understand she needs to return to a proper career." "There's more," Bradley said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They've been documenting everything you do, every client you lose, every struggle you have to show to Grandfather Walter. They want to prove you're unstable and irresponsible, so he'll write you out of his will entirely. Victoria's been positioning herself as the sole worthy heir." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "But Grandfather and we have a good relationship. He's always supported me." Bradley shook his head sadly. "That's why they're working so hard to change his mind. He's been in and out of the hospital, and they control who gets to see him. They've been telling him you're too busy with your internet business to visit." The depth of the betrayal kept revealing itself like layers of a rotten onion. Bradley showed me more messages where Catherine had been crafting a narrative that I was mentally unstable, possibly suffering from delusions of grandeur about my business success. "She keeps using words like manic and delusional when talking to Grandfather's doctors," Bradley explained. "She's trying to create a medical paper trail suggesting you're not competent." But the worst revelation was yet to come. I'd always wondered why my promising legal career had suddenly stalled before I quit. Partners who'd mentored me became distant plum assignments, went to other associates, and there were whispers about my reliability that I never understood. According to Bradley, Victoria had been behind it all. She'd spread rumors that I was planning to start my own firm and poach clients, that I'd been bad-mouthing the partners, that I had substance abuse issues. She'd systematically destroyed my reputation to ensure that when I did leave, it would look like failure rather than choice. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked Bradley, my hands shaking around my coffee cup. He looked ashamed. "Because I've watched it go too far. And because..." He hesitated, then continued. "They're planning something bigger for Grandfather's 92nd birthday next month. They want to do a formal family intervention, present a united front demanding you be removed from any inheritance. They've even hired a lawyer to contest any will that includes you." Over the next few days, more truth came to light. My ex-boyfriend Marcus reached out unexpectedly. We'd broken up 2 years ago under circumstances that had always felt strange to me. He'd suddenly become distant, picking fights over nothing until I ended things. "I need to apologize," he said when we met for lunch. "Victoria, she came on to me. Multiple times. When I rejected her, she threatened to tell you I'd been cheating if I didn't break up with you. She said you were too fragile to handle the truth about your family, and it would be kinder to just let you go." The manipulations went deeper than I'd ever imagined. Victoria's assistant, Emma, a sweet girl who'd always been kind to me, asked to meet privately. She was terrified of losing her job, but felt she had to warn me. "There's going to be an ambush at your grandfather's birthday," she confirmed. "I've had to book a private dining room arranged for security, the works. They want to make sure you can't leave until they've said their piece. And Wendy, they've hired a private investigator. They have photos of your apartment, your car, your clothes, everything to prove you're living in poverty." The investigator had apparently been following me for months. Every time I'd bought generic groceries instead of name brand, every time I'd window shopped without buying, every time I'd taken the bus instead of an Uber, it had been documented. They'd even photographed me doing my own laundry at a laundromat, which in their world was apparently a sign of complete destitution. But the cruelest betrayal came from an unexpected source. I discovered that 3 years ago I'd submitted a business proposal to the family's quarterly meeting. It was an idea for digitalizing and modernizing the family's various business interests, creating an interconnected online presence that could have generated millions in new revenue. I'd been laughed out of the room. Now looking through the WhatsApp messages, I saw that Victoria had represented my exact proposal 6 months later as her own idea. It had been implemented and was now one of their most profitable ventures. My father had been the gatekeeper for all of grandfather's communications. Every call went through him first. Every visit had to be approved. I learned that grandfather had been asking for me, specifically wanting to hear about my business. But they'd told him I was too busy to visit, that I'd said I didn't have time for family anymore. They'd isolated him from the one grandchild who'd chosen a different path, all while poisoning his mind against me. The family surveillance extended to my digital life too. They'd created fake accounts to follow my business social media, screenshotting anything they could twist into evidence of failure or instability. A joke post about surviving on coffee and determination became evidence of poor health choices and financial desperation. A motivational quote about following your dreams became proof of my detachment from reality. James, who I'd thought was at least neutral in all this, had been actively participating too. He'd reached out to several of my potential clients in the healthcare sector, subtly suggesting they might want to work with more established firms for their digital needs. At least 3 contracts I'd lost suddenly made sense. He'd sabotaged me while smiling to my face at family dinners. The pattern became clear as I pieced together years of small cruelties and major betrayals. Every time I'd shown independence, they'd found a way to punish me. Every success I'd achieved, they'd found a way to diminish. They weren't just disappointed in my choices, they were actively working to destroy any chance I had of succeeding outside their narrow definition of achievement. But what hurt most was understanding why. Victoria's messages made it clear she'd always been threatened by me. Wendy always had grandfather's favor. One message read, "Just because she makes him laugh with her stupid jokes and listens to his boring stories. If she succeeds outside the family structure, it undermines everything we've built. We can't let that happen." They'd turned my existence into a threat to their worldview. If I could be happy and successful without their approval, without their path, what did that say about the choices they'd made? What did that say about the sacrifices they'd endured to maintain the Wellington legacy I represented, a freedom they'd never allowed themselves to imagine? And for that, I had to be destroyed. As I sat in my small apartment that night, surrounded by the evidence of their betrayal, I made a decision. They wanted to destroy me because they feared what I represented. They wanted to erase me because my success would prove their entire worldview wrong. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated the very thing they mocked: my understanding of the digital world, my network of connections, my ability to build something from nothing. They thought I was playing with toys while they dealt with real power. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. 3 weeks after Bradley's revelation, my phone rang at 6 in the morning. It was Meredith Chang, CEO of Chang Industries, a company I'd pitched to 6 months earlier without success. "Wendy, I want to apologize for not getting back to you sooner," she said, her voice warm but professional. "I've been following your work with smaller clients and I'm impressed. We'd like to bring you on for a complete digital transformation of our brand. Are you available to meet this afternoon? By noon, I'd signed a contract worth more than my entire previous year's income. By the end of the week, 2 more Fortune 500 companies had reached out. Apparently, my work with a small sustainable fashion startup had caught the attention of bigger players who were looking for fresh perspectives on digital engagement. Within a month, I had to turn down clients because I couldn't handle the volume. What my family didn't understand was that while they'd been playing their old money games, I'd been building something far more valuable: a reputation for authentic, innovative digital strategies that actually worked. The corporate world was changing, and they needed people like me who understood how to navigate it. Every mockery they'd thrown my way about playing on the internet, had blinded them to the reality that the internet was now where real business happened. As my success grew, I started noticing interesting things happening around the Wellington Empire. Victoria's law firm, the prestigious Whitman & Associates, was suddenly in the news, but not in a good way. The state bar was investigating several ethics violations related to their merger and acquisition practices. Someone had leaked internal emails showing they'd been advising clients to hide assets during bankruptcy proceedings. The whistleblower remained anonymous, but the damage was swift and severe. My father Richard's investment firm, Wellington Capital Management, faced their own troubles. The SEC suddenly took interest in some irregular trading patterns from 3 years ago. Documents mysteriously appeared on WikiLeaks, showing suspicious communications with offshore accounts. Richard spent more time with lawyers than clients, and investors started pulling their money out. Catherine's carefully cultivated charitable image took a hit when the Boston Globe ran an exposé on administrative costs at several high-profile charities. Her pet organization, the Wellington Foundation for Literacy, was revealed to spend 80 cents of every dollar on administrative costs, which included first-class travel luxury hotels and catered board meetings at 5-star restaurants. The reporter who broke the story mentioned receiving the tip from a concerned citizen who provided detailed financial records. James faced his own reckoning when several former patients filed complaints about unnecessary procedures and inflated billing. The medical board launched an investigation after receiving detailed documentation about surgeries that seemed designed more for profit than patient care. His position as youngest department head suddenly looked less secure as the hospital tried to distance itself from the growing scandal. I watched all this unfold from my small apartment, sipping coffee and saying nothing. When family friends asked if I knew anything about the various investigations, I expressed shock and concern. "I've been so focused on my little internet business," I'd say with wide-eyed innocence. I had no idea things were so serious. The beautiful irony was that I hadn't orchestrated most of it, not directly. But my digital success had given me access to a network of journalists, investigators, and corporate insiders who'd been sitting on information for years. A casual mention here, an introduction there, and suddenly people with legitimate grievances found the courage and platform to speak up. My family had made so many enemies over the years. All it took was someone showing those enemies that the Wellingtons weren't untouchable. Uncle Theodore, my father's younger brother who'd been exiled from the family inner circle years ago for marrying beneath his station, reached out to me. "I see what you're doing," he said over lunch at a small Italian restaurant, "and I want to help." Theodore had been quietly documenting family business irregularities for 20 years, ever since they'd cheated him out of his share of grandfather's first company. His files were extensive and damning. "They think they're royalty," Theodore said, sliding a USB drive across the table. "They've forgotten that royalty can be overthrown." The drive contained evidence of tax evasion, bribery, and corporate malfeasance going back decades. It was a roadmap of every skeleton in every Wellington closet. Meanwhile, grandfather's health had taken another turn. He'd been hospitalized with pneumonia, and the family was circling like vultures. I tried to visit but was told by hospital security that I wasn't on the approved visitor list. The security guard, however, was sympathetic. "I know who you are, miss," he said quietly. "Your grandfather's been asking for you. He gets very upset when they tell him you're too busy to come." That's when I met Patricia, one of grandfather's nurses. She'd overheard my conversation with security and followed me to the parking garage. "Your family is limiting his visitors," she confirmed. "They say it's for his health, but he's lucid and keeps asking for his granddaughter, Wendy. He wants to talk to you about some business idea you had. He keeps saying they're stealing from you." Patricia became my inside source, keeping me updated on grandfather's condition and passing along messages. She was disgusted by how my family treated the staff, barking orders and making demands without basic courtesy. "Your sister threw a clipboard at me yesterday because I wouldn't give her an extra update beyond scheduled rounds," Patricia said. "And your mother tried to have me fired for letting your grandfather use my phone." The turning point came when I accidentally ran into Daniel Morrison, Victoria's husband, at a coffee shop downtown. He looked exhausted, defeated, even nothing like the confident prosecutor I'd met at family events. "Wendy," he said, his voice flat. "I suppose you've heard about Victoria's troubles at the firm." I expressed appropriate concern, but Daniel saw through it. "You know what? I'm glad it's happening. Do you know what it's like being married to someone who sees everyone as either a stepping stone or an obstacle? She's been lying to me for years. About money, about her cases, about..." He paused, then continued, "about other men. I found the messages. She's been having an affair with one of the senior partners, the same one who's now throwing her under the bus for the ethics violations." Daniel's revelation opened another door. He was willing to share information about Victoria's hidden assets accounts she'd opened in both their names, without his knowledge, schemes she'd been running that made the firm's ethics violations look tame in comparison. "I'm filing for divorce," he said. "And I'm going to make sure she doesn't hide a penny." My phone buzzed constantly now with media requests. Journalists wanted to know about my connection to the Wellington family, whether I had any comment on the various scandals. I maintained a dignified silence publicly while privately ensuring the right information reached the right people. My digital marketing skills came in handy. I knew exactly how to make information go viral without leaving fingerprints. One evening, while reviewing contracts from new clients, I got an unexpected call from Harrison Blackwood, one of my father's biggest investors. "Miss Wellington," he said formally, "I'm calling to inform you that Blackwood Enterprises will be pulling all investments from Wellington Capital Management. We've also decided to hire your firm for our digital transformation project if you're interested." The dominoes were falling faster now. Each scandal fed into the next, creating a perfect storm of legal troubles and public humiliation. The Wellington name, once synonymous with power and prestige in Boston, was becoming toxic. Country club memberships were quietly revoked. Charity boards asked for resignations. Social invitations dried up. Through Patricia, I learned that grandfather was following the news with great interest. "He laughed yesterday," she told me. "Actually laughed when he saw the news about the investigation into your father's firm. He said something about chickens coming home to roost. He was weak but still sharp, and he'd started making calls to his lawyers demanding changes to his will despite family protests. My clients started introducing me to other CEOs, other decision-makers who were intrigued by my work. Each success built on the last, and soon I had a waiting list of companies wanting to work with me. I hired 2 assistants, then 4, then had to rent actual office space because my apartment couldn't handle the growth. The girl who allegedly played on the internet for a living was building a digital empire. Victoria made a fatal error when she tried to poach one of my biggest clients, approaching them with promises of real professional service from her firm. Not only did the client immediately inform me, but they also shared her desperate pitch with other potential clients, warning them about unethical competitive practices. Her reputation, already damaged by the ethics investigation, took another massive hit. The best part was that I documented everything. Every success, every client testimonial, every award and recognition my firm received. I was building a careful record of my achievements, a stark contrast to the narrative my family had tried to create. The girl they'd painted as a failure was out-earning all of them combined, and I had the receipts to prove it. As grandfather's 92nd birthday approached, the family's planned intervention looked less like a power play and more like a desperate last stand. They were hemorrhaging money on legal fees, their reputations were in tatters, and their carefully constructed world was crumbling. They still thought they could salvage their position by controlling grandfather's will, but they had no idea what was coming. I'd been playing defense long enough. It was time to go on the offensive. The morning of grandfather Walter's 92nd birthday started with federal agents raiding my father's offices. I watched from across the street, sipping a latte, as men in FBI windbreakers carried out boxes of documents from Wellington Capital Management. The local news crews were already there, their cameras capturing every humiliating moment as Richard was led out in handcuffs for questioning. The SEC had finally found enough evidence to move from investigation to prosecution. By noon, Victoria's law license had been temporarily suspended pending the ethics investigation. The state bar had received additional evidence seemingly from nowhere about client funds being misappropriated and conflicts of interest that violated basic legal standards. Her firm announced her voluntary leave of absence in a terse press release that fooled no one. The senior partner she'd been having an affair with threw her under the bus, completely claiming she'd acted alone in all the violations. Catherine's downfall was more public and somehow more satisfying. The Boston Globe published a brutal follow-up to their charity exposé, this time with photographs from the Wellington Foundation's working retreats in the Maldives and private jets used for site visits to luxury resorts. But the killing blow was the revelation of her affair with her 25-year-old tennis instructor, complete with love letters she'd written on charity letterhead and receipts for gifts purchased with foundation credit cards. The society matron who'd spent decades cultivating an image of moral superiority was exposed as a hypocrite and a fraud. James might have weathered his medical board investigation if not for the nurse who came forward with recordings. Apparently, he'd bragged during surgery about unnecessary procedures, literally laughing about paying for my new boat, one appendectomy at a time. More patients came forward with similar stories, and suddenly the hospital had no choice but to suspend him pending a full investigation. The youngest department head in Mass General history became the youngest to be escorted out by security. The family's emergency meeting that evening was held at the house in Beacon Hill, the same place where they'd planned my humiliation months earlier. But now, instead of confident conspirators, they were panicked rats on a sinking ship. I know this because Emma, Victoria's former assistant whom I'd hired the week before, had left her phone recording in the conference room by accident during setup. The recording was a masterpiece of mutual destruction. They blamed each other for everything, Victoria screaming that Richard's sloppy financial dealings had drawn attention to all of them. Richard roared back that her ethics violations had started the whole investigation. Catherine wailed about her ruined reputation while James accused them all of being careless. But the best part was when they realized their usual lawyers wouldn't take their calls anymore. Apparently representing the Wellingtons had become career poison. "This is all Wendy's fault," Victoria hissed on the recording. "She did this. I don't know how, but she did this." Richard's voice was cold as ice in response. "You mean the daughter you insisted on humiliating, the one you've been sabotaging for years, the one whose business proposal you stole. That Wendy?" The accusation hung in the air before they devolved into more screaming. Their former friends in high society weren't just distancing themselves, they were actively sharing stories about Wellington abuses they'd endured over the years. Margaret Whitfield went on record about Catherine's bullying tactics on charity boards. Harrison Blackwood detailed the strong-arm tactics Richard had used in business deals. Even their country club published a statement about reviewing membership standards in light of recent revelations, which everyone knew meant the Wellingtons were out. The media fed on the scandal like sharks in bloody water. "Wellington dynasty crumbles," read the Herald headline. "From billions to bankruptcy, the fall of Boston's first family," screamed the Globe. Financial journalists dug into decades of questionable deals. Society columnists enumerated every snub, every cruelty the Wellingtons had inflicted on others who were now eager to share their stories. In the midst of this chaos, grandfather Walter made his move. Despite family attempts to block him, he'd managed to contact his original lawyers, the ones who'd helped him build his fortune before Richard took control. The cavalry arrived in the form of Mr. Harrison from Harrison Katz, and associates, a man who'd known Walter for 60 years and wasn't intimidated by anyone. "I've been trying to reach Mr. Wellington for months," Harrison told the hospital administration. "His son has been intercepting calls and blocking visits. I have here a court order for immediate access and a temporary restraining order preventing the family from interfering with my client's legal affairs." The document was airtight, and suddenly the family's control evaporated. I was in grandfather's hospital room within an hour. He was frail but alert, his eyes sharp as ever. "Wendy, my dear girl," he said, squeezing my hand. I've been watching the news. Quite a show you've put on. I started to deny involvement, but he chuckled. Don't insult my intelligence. I know orchestration when I see it. Your grandmother would have been proud. She had the same iron spine when someone crossed her. We talked for hours. I told him about my business successes, showing him client testimonials and profit projections on my laptop. His eyes lit up when I explained how I'd modernized marketing strategies for traditional companies, bridging the gap between old and new business models. This is exactly what I proposed 3 years ago, I said, showing him my original presentation. Victoria stole it and claimed credit. I know, he said simply. She was sloppy. Used the same slides, just changed the name. I'm old, not stupid. I've been watching all of them, waiting to see who would prove worthy of what I built. He gestured weakly toward the window overlooking Boston. I came here with nothing, built an empire with my bare hands. I wanted my family to appreciate that, to understand that wealth without wisdom is worthless. Instead, they became everything I despised about the old money folks who looked down on me. Mr. Harrison took careful notes as grandfather detailed his wishes. The will he'd been pressured to sign last year was to be completely revoked. A new one would be drawn up immediately. I want it done today, grandfather insisted. I can feel them circling, and I won't give them another chance to manipulate things. The lawyer nodded and called in his team. That evening, the family discovered their access to various Wellington accounts had been frozen by court order pending investigation. The house in Beacon Hill, the cars, the boats, even Catherine's jewelry, everything was under legal scrutiny. Their credit cards were declined at restaurants where they'd held court for decades. Victoria was photographed trying 3 different cards at Neiman Marcus before security politely escorted her out. The vultures who'd once circled their prey were now being circled themselves. Former employees came forward with lawsuits for wrongful termination and workplace harassment. Business partners emerged with claims of fraud and breach of contract. Every enemy they'd made, every bridge they'd burned, it all came back at once in a coordinated tsunami of legal action. Catherine's tennis instructor sold his story to a tabloid complete with text messages, where she'd promised to leave Richard and run away with him. The messages also revealed her casual racism toward the staff and her plans to hide money offshore. The refined society lady was exposed as a desperate, delusional woman clinging to youth and relevance through increasingly pathetic measures. James's situation worsened when a janitor at the hospital came forward with security footage of him stealing medications from the pharmacy. Apparently, his God complex came with a substance abuse problem he'd been hiding for years. The medical board moved from suspension to permanent revocation of his license. The Golden Boy surgeon was finished before his 30th birthday. Richard tried to flee the country but was stopped at Logan Airport. His passport was flagged and he was arrested on charges of wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. The perp walk photos showed a broken man, his usually perfect hair, disheveled his custom suit, wrinkled, his empire reduced to whatever would fit in a prison cell. Victoria's husband Daniel made good on his divorce threats, but with a twist. He'd been building his own case against her for months, documenting her lies, her affairs, and her financial crimes. The prenup she'd insisted on to protect her assets backfired spectacularly when it was revealed those assets were obtained illegally. She would get nothing in the divorce and probably owe millions in restitution. Through it all, I maintained my public silence, while privately ensuring every revelation reached the right people at the right time. My business continued to thrive, each new success a reminder that the fake job they'd mocked was more real than their house of cards empire. I'd moved into a nicer apartment, bought a reliable car, and built a life based on my own achievements, rather than inherited privilege. The Wellington empire built over generations collapsed in a matter of months. But the most satisfying moment was yet to come. Grandfather had one more surprise in store, and the family was about to learn just how thoroughly they'd been outmaneuvered by the granddaughter they'd tried to destroy. The pounding on my apartment door at 2 a.m. woke up the entire building. Through the peephole, I saw Victoria mascara streaking down her cheeks, designer dress wrinkled and stained, looking nothing like the polished corporate lawyer who'd humiliated me months ago. "Wendy, please, I need to talk to you." She sobbed, her voice hoarse from crying. I have nowhere else to go. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. She practically fell into my apartment, a broken shadow of her former self. "They froze everything," she gasped between sobs. "My accounts, my credit cards, even my emergency fund." "Daniel locked me out of the house. The firm won't return my calls. I've been living in my car for 2 days." The woman who'd mocked my small apartment was now grateful for a glass of water from my kitchen. "I need your help." She said the words clearly costing her every ounce of remaining pride. "You know people in tech law, digital law. I'm being charged with cybercrimes I don't understand. Something about unauthorized access to client databases and digital fraud. I don't even know what that means. My regular lawyers won't touch the case and the public defender is useless." I let her talk, recording every word on my phone while maintaining a sympathetic expression. She confessed to everything: the years of sabotage, the stolen business proposal, the campaign to destroy my reputation. "I was so jealous," she admitted. "You were always grandfather's favorite. You could make him laugh. He'd light up when you walked in the room. And then you had the audacity to leave law, to reject everything we'd been taught mattered, and you were still happy." It made me so angry. The confessions poured out like water from a broken dam. She'd hired hackers to try to crash my business website. She'd created fake negative reviews for my services. She'd even tried to seduce my biggest clients, offering them personal attention if they'd drop my firm. Each revelation was more pathetic than the last, painting a picture of someone consumed by jealousy and insecurity. Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was Richard calling from a holding facility. "Wendy, I need you to contact Senator Morrison for me. Your digital firm worked on his campaign, didn't it? I need you to call in that favor. These charges are ridiculous. It's all a misunderstanding that can be cleared up with the right phone calls." The man who dismissed my work as playing on the internet now desperately needed those connections. By morning, they were all calling. Catherine had been served with both criminal charges and divorce papers. Richard had been denied bail, and James was facing not just medical board sanctions, but criminal charges for drug theft. Their entire world had collapsed overnight, and suddenly the daughter they'd mocked and humiliated was their only hope. Catherine arrived at my office at 9, trying to maintain some dignity in yesterday's clothes and smeared makeup. "We need crisis management," she announced, as if she were still in a position to make demands. "You understand social media. You can fix this. Spin the narrative. Make people understand this is all a terrible mistake." She actually brought a checkbook, not realizing her accounts were frozen and her checks worthless. I let them all come. Let them all beg. Let them all confess. Every meeting was recorded, every desperate plea documented. They offered me everything. They thought they still had property that was no longer theirs. Positions in companies that were being dissolved, jewelry that had been seized as evidence, promises of future wealth that would never materialize. The most pathetic was James, who showed up high on something barely coherent, but still trying to bargain. "I know things about the hospital board," he slurred. "Dirt on everyone. You help me, I'll give you information worth millions. We can blackmail them together." The brilliant surgeon who'd saved lives was reduced to proposing criminal conspiracies in his desperation. Victoria made 7 trips to my apartment over the next week, each time more desperate than the last. She brought evidence of other family crimes I hadn't even discovered, throwing everyone else under the bus in hopes of saving herself. "Mother has been embezzling from the charity for 20 years, she revealed. "I have the real books, and father. He's been insider trading since before we were born. James has been selling prescriptions to dealers. I have proof of everything." They turned on each other completely. Richard called to tell me about Victoria's tax evasion. Catherine exposed Richard's multiple affairs and secret families. James revealed Catherine's drug addiction and psychiatric history. Victoria documented James's botched surgeries covered up by the hospital. Each one thought they could buy my help by destroying the others. But the desperation reached new levels when they realized grandfather was changing his will. They needed me not just for my connections, but because I was the only one who still had access to him. "You have to talk to him," Catherine pleaded. "Make him understand we're still his family. Whatever he's leaving you, we'll double it if you can just get us back in the will. Triple it. Name your price." Their offers became increasingly unhinged. Victoria promised to publicly apologize, to take out full-page ads, admitting she'd wronged me. Richard offered to make me CEO of whatever remained of his company. Catherine said she'd tell everyone I was the true genius of the family. James volunteered to be my personal servant, literally offering to clean my apartment and run my errands. When I remained unmoved, they tried threats. Victoria suggested she had compromising photos of me from college that she could release. I laughed and reminded her that revenge porn was a felony, especially crossing state lines. Richard hinted at physical harm before remembering he was being recorded in federal lockup. Catherine tried to guilt me about family loyalty while seemingly forgetting the years of cruelty she'd inflicted. The low point came when Victoria attempted actual blackmail. She'd manufactured evidence suggesting I was behind their downfall, created fake emails and documents implicating me in various schemes. "Help me, or I'll take you down with us," she hissed during what would be her final visit. "I'll make sure everyone knows you orchestrated this whole thing. You'll lose your business, your reputation, everything." I smiled calmly and pulled out my phone, playing back recordings of her previous confessions. "You mean the business you tried to sabotage? The reputation you spent years trying to destroy?" "I think the authorities will be very interested in these recordings, especially the parts where you admit to cybercrime and fraud. Oh, and that blackmail threat you just made, that's another felony." She broke completely, then collapsing on my floor in hyperventilating sobs. The woman who'd stood in designer heels mocking my little internet job was now literally on her knees in my modest apartment, begging for mercy. "Please, Wendy. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything. I'll say anything. Just help me. I can't go to prison. I won't survive." Similar scenes played out with each of them. They cycled through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, but never quite reached acceptance. Even in their lowest moments, there were flashes of the old arrogance, the belief that they were somehow entitled to escape consequences that would destroy ordinary people. But I documented everything meticulously. Their confessions, their threats, their pathetic attempts at manipulation. My lawyer, a brilliant woman named Sharon who specialized in corporate crime, could barely contain her glee. "They're building our case for us," she said, reviewing the recordings. "Every word is another nail in their coffins." The media attention intensified as details of their desperation leaked. Photos of Victoria sleeping in her car went viral. Video of Richard being denied entry to his former office became a meme. Catherine's tennis instructor did a tell-all interview describing her increasingly unhinged behavior. James was arrested again, this time for trying to break into a pharmacy. Through it all, I maintained the same public stance, expressing concern for my family's troubles while focusing on my thriving business. When reporters asked for comments, I spoke about the importance of mental health support and second chances, never revealing the recordings and evidence I was accumulating. To the world, I was the dignified daughter rising above family drama. In reality, I was documenting their self-destruction with clinical precision. The final desperate act came the night before grandfather's will reading. They tried to break into my apartment, all four of them together, in a last-ditch effort to steal my laptop and any evidence I might have. What they didn't know was that I'd upgraded my security system with cameras in the hallway. The footage of them fumbling with lockpicks, arguing in whispers, and eventually triggering the alarm was both pathetic and damning. When the police arrived, they tried to claim it was a family visit gone wrong. But the tools they'd brought, the dark clothing, and their inability to explain why they were visiting at 3 a.m. told a different story. Add in their existing legal troubles, and what might have been a misdemeanor became another set of serious charges. As I watched them being led away in handcuffs again, I felt no satisfaction, just a hollow sadness for what could have been. They'd had everything: wealth, status, education, opportunity, and they'd thrown it all away out of greed and cruelty. Now they were about to learn what grandfather had in store for them, and their desperation would seem like luxury compared to what was coming. The reading of Walter Wellington's last will and testament was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a gray Thursday morning at Harrison Katz and Associates' downtown offices. The prestigious firm had handled grandfather's affairs for decades, and their mahogany-paneled conference room had seen billions of dollars change hands. But never quite like this. My family arrived separately, each flanked by lawyers they could barely afford. Victoria wore a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit her once-perfect manicure, chipped and grown out. Richard was in custody, brought by federal marshals who stood at the door like granite sentinels. Catherine clutched a tissue box, her designer bag replaced by a canvas tote. James fidgeted constantly, his hands shaking from withdrawal. I sat at the opposite end of the table in a simple black dress I'd bought with my own money, earned from my own work. No designer labels, no family jewels, just me and the life I'd built, despite their best efforts to destroy it. Mr. Harrison nodded to me warmly before beginning. "Before we read the will," he said, adjusting his glasses. Mr. Wellington insisted on a video message being played. He recorded this 2 days before his passing. The lights dimmed, and grandfather's face appeared on the screen, looking tired but determined. "If you're watching this," grandfather began, his voice still commanding despite his frailty, "then I'm gone, and you're all gathered to see who gets what. But first I need you to understand why I've made the decisions I have." He paused, his eyes seeming to look directly at each of them. "I came to this country with nothing, built an empire with my hands and my mind. I wanted my family to understand the value of work, the satisfaction of earning rather than inheriting. Instead, I created entitled monsters who've spent their lives stepping on others to climb higher." The room was dead silent except for Catherine's muffled sobs. On screen, grandfather continued, "Richard, you were my eldest son. I gave you every opportunity, and you chose to steal rather than build. Victoria, you had a brilliant legal mind and used it to destroy rather than defend. Catherine, you turned charity into personal gain. James, you took an oath to do no harm and violated it for profit. But Wendy..." His face softened. "You chose differently. When the path I'd laid out didn't fit, you had the courage to forge your own. When they mocked you, you persevered. When they sabotaged you, you rebuilt. You showed the same spirit I had when I started with nothing. You understood that wealth isn't about money, it's about creating something meaningful." The video ended and Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "Now, for the distribution of assets. To Richard Wellington, I leave the sum of $1, the exact amount he stole from the coffee fund at his first job, thinking no one would notice. May it remind you that theft, no matter how small, is still theft." Richard's lawyers started to object, but Harrison continued. "To Victoria Wellington, I leave my complete collection of law books, including the annotated volumes on ethics and professional responsibility. Perhaps reading them will teach you what law school failed to impart." Victoria's face went white. Those books were worth perhaps a few $1,000s and nothing more. "To Catherine Wellington, I leave my mother's cookbook and a year's supply of groceries to be distributed weekly. You'll learn what actual charity means by living on what you expected others to survive on. To James Wellington, I leave enrollment in a rehabilitation program and a job at a free clinic upon completion. You'll remember why you became a doctor by serving those who can't pay." James started to speak, but his lawyer silenced him. "To my brother Theodore, who was cast out for marrying for love rather than money, I leave $10 million and my deepest apologies. You were the only one who understood what family truly meant." Gasps echoed around the room. Theodore hadn't even been invited to the reading. "The remainder of my estate, including all companies, properties, investments, and liquid assets totaling approximately $800 million, I leave to my granddaughter, Wendy Wellington. Additionally, I name her as sole trustee of the Wellington Foundation with instructions to investigate and correct all past misappropriations." The room exploded. Victoria screamed that it couldn't be legal. Richard's lawyers demanded to see documentation. Catherine fainted either genuinely or strategically. James just stared at me with naked hatred. But Mr. Harrison was prepared for this. Mr. Wellington anticipated challenges, he said, calmly producing a thick folder. Here are 3 separate psychiatric evaluations confirming his mental competence. Here are video recordings of each will signing session. Here are affidavits from witnesses. And here, he smiled slightly, are recordings of each of you attempting to coerce or threaten him in his final months. Any challenge to this would require explaining those recordings in court. He wasn't finished. There are, however, some provisions. Ms. Wellington, your grandfather wanted you to have options regarding your family. He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside were detailed instructions. I could choose to provide for them, but only under specific conditions. I looked at my family, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. They weren't powerful titans who'd made my life miserable. They were broken, greedy people who'd destroyed themselves in pursuit of wealth they'd already had. Grandfather had given me the power to be cruel or kind, to seek revenge or redemption. I'll honor grandfather's wishes, I said finally. Trust funds will be established for basic living expenses, but with conditions. Victoria, you'll work at legal aid for 3 years helping people who can't afford representation. You'll see what law is supposed to be about. Richard, you'll teach financial literacy in the prison system. You took advantage of people's ignorance, now you'll help educate them. Catherine, you'll run a legitimate charity, a soup kitchen in Roxbury. You'll serve meals, clean tables, and learn what actual charitable work means. James, after rehab, you'll work at the free clinic in Dorchester for 5 years. You'll remember that medicine is about healing, not profit. Additionally, I continued, you'll all participate in family therapy together and separately. You'll make public apologies for your crimes and donate your time to speaking about white-collar crime and its consequences. Any violation of these terms, any attempt to return to your old ways, and the support ends immediately. They had no choice but to accept. The alternative was complete destitution and likely significant prison time. Their lawyers advised them to take the deal, recognizing it was more generous than they deserved. One by one, they signed the agreements, their hands shaking with rage and humiliation. But I had one more surprise. There's something else, I said, pulling out my laptop. Every recording of your confessions, every piece of evidence I've gathered, it's all being transferred to a digital vault. If any of you ever attempt to harm me, sabotage my work, or return to your criminal ways, everything gets released to law enforcement and media simultaneously. Consider it insurance. The meeting ended with my family filing out in silence, their dreams of wealth and power replaced by the reality of supervised charity work and court-mandated therapy. Richard was returned to custody to await sentencing. Victoria stumbled out, muttering about the indignity of public transportation. Catherine had to be helped to a taxi she could barely afford. James just stared at the table, perhaps finally understanding what he'd lost. Mr. Harrison smiled at me as we were left alone. Your grandfather would be proud. You could have destroyed them completely, but you chose to give them a chance at redemption. That's true strength. He handed me another envelope. This was to be given to you privately, your grandfather's personal letter. I opened it carefully, recognizing his handwriting. My dearest Wendy, if you're reading this, then you've proven yourself to be everything I hoped. You didn't let them break you, and more importantly, you didn't let victory make you cruel. Use the wealth wisely. Build something meaningful. And remember, true success isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touch and the integrity you maintain. All my love, grandfather. The Wellington Empire was mine now, but I had no intention of ruling it like my family had. The companies would be restructured to prioritize employees and ethical practices. The foundation would actually help people instead of funding lavish parties. The properties would be used for good, creating affordable housing and community centers. As I left the law offices, I passed by the portraits of previous Wellington patriarchs lining the walls. Stern men who'd built fortunes on the backs of others who'd valued wealth over wisdom. I thought about adding grandfather's portrait but decided against it. He wouldn't want to be remembered that way. Instead, I'd create a scholarship in his name for students who chose unconventional paths. My phone buzzed with messages from clients, employees, and reporters. The business world was watching to see what the new head of Wellington Industries would do. They expected corporate raiders' tactics or massive sell-offs. They'd be disappointed. I had bigger plans, ones that involved using wealth to create opportunity rather than hoarding it for status. My family would serve their sentences, both legal and personal. Maybe they'd learn something from their forced charity work. Maybe they'd discover empathy through serving others. Or maybe they'd just endure it while plotting their return to power. Either way, they'd have to do it without the Wellington fortune enabling their worst impulses. As I drove away in my sensible Honda past the luxury dealerships my family had frequented, I thought about the journey from that humiliating night at the gala to this moment of complete victory. They'd laughed at my fake job and tried to destroy my chosen path. Now that same path had given me everything they'd valued, and the power to teach them what really mattered. The sun broke through the gray clouds as I headed to my office, ready to merge my successful digital firm with the Wellington Empire. Grandfather was right. True success wasn't measured in dollars, but in integrity maintained and lives improved. My family had forgotten that lesson. I intended to make sure no one else did. 1 year later, I stood in the renovated Wellington Foundation headquarters, watching the sunset paint Boston's skyline in shades of gold and amber. The space that had once hosted champagne galas for the elite now buzzed with young entrepreneurs from underserved communities using our free co-working space and resources to build their dreams. My assistant knocked gently. "Ms. Wellington, your 3 o'clock is here." I turned from the window to see Victoria entering wearing a simple pantsuit from Target and carrying a worn briefcase. The designer clothes and superior attitude were long gone, replaced by something I'd never seen in my sister before: genuine humility. "Wendy," she said, her voice steady but respectful. "Thank you for seeing me. I wanted to give you my quarterly report in person." She handed me a detailed document outlining her work at the Legal Aid Society. 300 pro bono hours, 50 families helped with housing disputes, 20 immigrants guided through citizenship applications. Real work, real impact. "I also wanted to tell you," she continued, fidgeting with her briefcase handle. "I got a letter from Mrs. Rodriguez yesterday. Remember the family I helped avoid eviction? Her daughter just got accepted to college, first in their family. She said she couldn't have done it without stable housing." Victoria's eyes misted. "I used to help corporations avoid paying taxes that could have funded schools for kids like her." The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. The first months had been brutal, watching my family struggle with public transportation, budgeting for groceries, and facing the contempt of people they'd once looked down upon. But slowly, something had shifted. Richard had become one of the most popular teachers in the federal prison education program. His students didn't know he'd once managed billions, they just knew he explained complex financial concepts in ways they could understand and use. He'd written me last month about an inmate who'd started a legitimate business plan based on his teachings. "I spent 40 years moving imaginary money for rich people," he'd written. "Now I'm teaching real skills to people who need them." Catherine's soup kitchen in Roxbury had become her life. The woman who'd once spent thousands on a single lunch now served hundreds of meals daily to homeless families. She'd learned every regular's name, their stories, their struggles. When the city tried to cut funding, she'd fought harder than she'd ever fought for her charity galas, even testifying at city council meetings about the necessity of feeding the hungry. James had perhaps changed the most. After completing rehab, he'd thrown himself into the free clinic work with an intensity that surprised everyone. He performed surgeries for free that he'd once charged 6 figures for treated patients, other doctors ignored, and started a program training local youth as medical assistants. "I saved more lives last month than I did in 5 years at Mass General," he'd told me during a family therapy session. "Turns out, healing people feels better than billing them." My business had merged seamlessly with the Wellington empire, creating a unique hybrid of old money stability and new economy innovation. We'd restructured every company to prioritize workers' rights and environmental responsibility. Profits had initially dropped, then soared as consumers rewarded ethical practices. Who knew treating people well was good business? Marcus and I had rekindled our relationship slowly, carefully. He'd been patient as I learned to trust again, understanding that years of family betrayal had left scars. We'd married 6 months ago in a small ceremony at grandfather's favorite park with only true friends in attendance. Victoria had sent a heartfelt letter of apology that actually moved me to tears. She'd come so far from the woman who'd tried to seduce him to hurt me. The book I'd written about choosing authentic success over inherited expectations had become a bestseller. All proceeds went to the Wellington Foundation's new mission, funding entrepreneurs from non-traditional backgrounds. We'd helped launch over 100 businesses in our first year, everything from food trucks to tech startups, all founded by people who'd been told they didn't belong in business. My favorite program was the monthly dinner for estranged family members. People who'd been cut off for choosing their own paths gathered to share stories and support. Artists disowned for not becoming lawyers. Teachers mocked for not joining family firms. Social workers scorned for wasting their education. We gave them grants, connections, and most importantly, validation that their choices mattered. Wendy. Victoria's voice pulled me back to the present. There's something else. I've been accepted to teach a course at Suffolk Law on legal ethics and social justice. They want me to share my story, the fall, and the lessons learned. I wanted to ask your permission before accepting. I smiled genuinely. Of course you should do it. Your story could prevent others from making the same mistakes. She nodded, relief visible on her face. And Victoria, I'm proud of you. Grandfather would be too. For the first time in years, we hugged like actual sisters. The therapy sessions had revealed so much. Our family's dysfunction went back generations, each Wellington patriarch creating new pressures and expectations. Grandfather had broken some patterns, but created others. We were finally breaking the cycle, completely choosing connection over competition, purpose over profit. Theodore had become my closest advisor, using his settlement to start a foundation for family members cast out for inappropriate marriages. Love shouldn't cost you your family, he'd said at the launch. But if it does, we'll be your family. His programs had already reunited dozens of families who'd let prejudice divide them. As night fell over Boston, I prepared for the evening's event. Not a black tie gala, but a celebration for our scholarship recipients. Kids who'd been told college wasn't for people like them were heading to Harvard, MIT, and other top schools with full rides. Their joy and gratitude reminded me daily why grandfather had entrusted me with his fortune. Richard arrived first, taking the subway he'd once mocked. He looked healthier than he had in years, the stress lines replaced by something approaching peace. Catherine came next, carrying homemade cookies from the soup kitchen. Mrs. Chen insisted I bring these, she explained. Said you can't have a party without her snickerdoodles. Even James made it, coming straight from a 16-hour shift, but energized rather than exhausted. We sat together perhaps for the first time as a real family. No hierarchy, no judgment. Just 4 siblings who'd learned hard lessons about what actually mattered. The conversation flowed naturally about our work, our growth, our gratitude for second chances we probably didn't deserve. I owe you an apology, Richard said, suddenly looking directly at me. Not the court-mandated one, a real one. We tried to destroy you because your success outside our system threatened everything we believed. But you were right all along. Real success is about impact, not income. The others nodded agreement, sharing their own reflections. Victoria talked about finding purpose in service. Catherine discussed discovering empathy through hardship. James explained how helping those in need had cured his God complex better than any therapy. They'd each found their way to wisdom through forced humility. As the scholarship recipients began arriving, my family naturally moved to welcome them, sharing their own stories of redemption and encouraging these young dreamers. Watching Victoria mentor a girl interested in law, seeing James explain medical school applications to a boy from Dorchester, witnessing Catherine comfort a nervous mother, I realized something profound. The family that had laughed at my no real job was gone, replaced by people who understood that jobs were just vehicles for purpose. The empire built on exploitation had become an engine for opportunity. The legacy of greed had transformed into one of generosity. Grandfather's test hadn't just revealed character, it had built it. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Wellington Foundation announces billion-dollar initiative for economic justice. I smiled, knowing this was just the beginning. The fortune that had corrupted my family for generations would now liberate others from similar cycles. "Thank you," Victoria said quietly as the evening wound down. "For saving us from ourselves. For giving us the chance to become people worth being." The others murmured agreement, and I felt the last of my anger dissolve. They'd paid for their crimes, learned from their mistakes, and chosen redemption. The girl they'd mocked for playing on the internet had used those same skills to save them when they needed it most. But more importantly, I'd saved myself from becoming them, from letting their values define success. The greatest revenge wasn't their humiliation, but my happiness, building a life of meaning despite their best efforts to stop me. As I looked around the room full of scholarship recipients, reformed family members, and dedicated volunteers, I thought about Grandfather's final lesson. True wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in lives touched and integrity maintained. My family had learned this the hard way. These students would learn it the right way. And the Wellington name, once synonymous with greed, would come to mean something entirely different: redemption, opportunity, and the courage to choose your own definition of success. The job they'd laughed at had given me the power to save them. But first I'd had to save myself from needing their validation. In the end, that was the real fortune. Grandfather had left me the strength to stand alone until they were ready to stand beside me. And now, finally, we stood together, not as the family we'd been born into, but as the family we'd chosen to become. I hope you enjoyed this story of family betrayal and ultimate redemption. What would you have done in Wendy's position? Would you have been as forgiving with family members who tried to destroy you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of triumph over adversity. Don't forget to share this with anyone who's ever been underestimated or mocked for choosing their own path. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, your worth isn't determined by others' opinions, but by the impact you choose to make in the world. Until next time, keep believing in yourself and never let anyone dim your light.